Hi everybody, here's my Module 9 case study about the assistant principal Richard Inman at Rocket Junior High. So to summarize the case, Mr. Inman is a first-year assistant principal at Rocket Junior High. He prides himself on making a difference in troubled kids' lives, but ends up having to send both a troubled student and an honor student to jail over an apparent bullying incident that involved a weapon. And then it's unsure what punishments may be deemed appropriate given the circumstances. Mr. Inman, the former Southside kid who has fought hard for the troubled kids growing up on that side of town, and in his first year as an assistant principal, he prides himself on getting to know the kids and making a difference in their lives and making sure that he's getting through to James, who's a troubled teen. He has improved his grades and avoided conflict as of late. James has been tardy and getting into trouble again and was caught suspiciously giving something to another student before being called into the office. The teacher who witnessed this event suspected that drugs may have been passed from James to David, so Mr. Inman calls them both into the office along with the SRO. Once David was searched, they find brass knuckles. The SRO immediately handcuffs David as it is prohibited to carry weapons at school. David begins crying and James admits that he forced David to hold on to him for him. The officer states that he has to take both students to jail to be charged with felony offenses related to carrying a weapon while on school grounds, and the school board is requires a 45-day expulsion for this offense. Mr. Inman called both mothers to let them know exactly what was going on. As expected, James' mother was not surprised, while David's mother was very angry. Mr. Inman did complete the form to expel James, but paused on completing David's because he feels he's not at fault. Later that week, Mr. Inman receives a call from the director of secondary education directing him to follow the policy and complete David's expulsion paperwork, and if he doesn't comply, he will be reprimanded for that. Legal and ethical issues here. From a legal standpoint, the SRO followed the protocol the way that he should have. Mr. Inman did not, and ethically, Mr. Inman needs to decide whether to follow his gut or the law and how he handles this case. David was harmed in this case. He was bullied into housing the weapon that was not his and he had no intention of using. He is now charged with a felony and should be expelled according to board policy. I feel that Mr. Inman was also harmed in this case because his job is threatened if he doesn't follow the protocol, but feels the black and white protocols do not allow for exceptions. In this case, that would be David. By law, once the SRO is called, he needs to be apprehend the students in possession of the weapon and take them into jail. Mr. Inman was not required by law to call the SRO into the situation. By not following policy and filling out the report for David, Mr. Inman is breaching contract by breaking school board policy and risking being written up or reprimanded for that. The students were allowed due process in any circumstances like this where the student has been expelled from school or charged with a crime, both from school and through the legal system. However, Mr. Inman decides not to file David's report. There can be no appeal. Winning an appeal with the school board or the school district can expunge his file and make a strong case for David in removing the felony charge as well. I don't feel that there has been any discrimination or harassment in this case, and it's important to remember that equal treatment does not equal equality, especially in punishments for both David and James. So what exactly happened? Mr. Inman, a first-year assistant principal at Rocket Junior High, caught a student who was bullied into holding a weapon that was not his, resulting in both the students being involved and arrested, charged with felonies and potential expulsion if he decides to write both students up following the school board policy. Ethically, Mr. Inman feels that David should not be in trouble for his role in the incident. However, due to the SRO being involved in the incident and the strict board policy, school board policies, Mr. Inman feels stuck between doing what he feels is right and just versus following the policy. The facts about the people, okay? It's important to gather all of the relevant facts before making a decision on whether to file the report against David, and as this decision could potentially affect both David and Mr. Eamon. So what we do know is that Rocker Junior High serves 965 students. Mr. Eamon is in his first year as an assistant principal and group on the south side and has a soft spot for these disadvantaged kids. James is a troubled kid with a history of misbehavior in school. David is an honor student with no record of misbehavior at school. A teacher is the one who witnessed the event that she believed to be the transfer of drugs. Mr. Inman asked both boys and the SRO into his office and addressed the situation. During this time, the SRO searched David and found brass knuckles, and James then admitted that the brass knuckles belonged to him, and he is the one that forced David to hold them. We know that the SRO arrested both boys and transported both of them into the local jail. And we also know that Mr. Inman called both boys' mothers to inform them of the situation. David's mom was very angry, while James was not surprised. And lastly, what we know is the director of secondary ed informed Mr. Inman that he may be reprimanded if he does not complete a report for David. Mr. Inman completed James's report but hesitated to file David's due to the feeling that he was not doing anything wrong on his part. What's unknown is from the information presented, we don't know the details about James' school record, only that he's familiar with the detention center. We have limited data on the students' demographics. We do not know what role the principal or other administrators had, if any, in this case. And we do not know the norms of the school, how the cases are normally handled, or anything like that. The facts about the place, what we know is that Rocket Junior High accepts students from the south side of town, and we can presume that the south side of town is a home to disadvantaged students. Things we don't know about Rocket Junior High is that we don't know how large the city is that it serves. We don't know the demographics of the students. We don't know if the school is rural, urban, or suburban. We don't know the physical condition of the school, and we do not know the socioeconomic status of the students or families in this district. Facts about the program. Rocket Junior High serves over 900 students. The school offers honors classes. The school policy is zero tolerance for weapons on school grounds and requires a mandatory 45-day expulsion. And we also know that the district has a disciplinary alternative education program. What we don't know about the program is we don't know what grades Rocket Junior High serves. We can assume that Rocket Junior High is a public school, but we don't know that for sure. We do not know any details on the curriculum provided by Rocket Junior High or the district or the type of programs offered except for the honors classes. And we know we are unsure that the opinions for extracurricular activities, we don't know the options for band, and however, we do not know other programs offered at the school and what those participation rates are. So, review and prioritizing the information. Okay, Mr. Inman, a first-year assistant principal at Rocket Junior High School, is told by the director of secondary ed that he has to follow protocol, file the paperwork of expulsion on a student who was coerced into this situation that we're in. Mr. Inman feels that the protocol will hurt the honor student by expulsion, and Mr. Inman has created a relationship with a misbehaved student who coerced the honor student. The situation that's at hand is a student coerced or bullied another student into holding brass knuckles for him. This was witnessed by a teacher. It was found by the school SRO after Mr. Inman investigated the situation, and the brass knuckles were admitted by the troubled student that they were his. Both students were convicted of the felony for carrying an illegal weapon on school grounds. Both students should be allowed due process, and both students should be allowed to file an appeal if they feel it's necessary. The students, one is a student who has been in trouble in the past and has began to start to turn the corner. The parent is uninvolved in the student services time at the district alternative education program. The other student, David, is an honor student who is coerced into holding the brass knuckles for James, the troubled student, and the parents are mad about the situation. Student is allowed to go back to school within a week. Identifying the options and possible consequences for what's going to happen here. So if we take the no action option, Mr. Inman could ignore the Director of Secondary Education's request to file the expulsion papers for David. Mr. Inman would be officially reprimanded for not following district protocol at that point. The extreme option is Mr. Inman does not follow up on the paperwork. Mr. Inman is officially reprimanded. He put on an improvement plan, asked to resign, fired, or relocated to a non-administration position. David is not able to file an appeal. The suspension, expulsion, and felony would stay on his record, and James stays in the disciplinary alternative education program and falls back into his old ways. So, identifying again, alternative option number 1, Mr. Inman complies with the Director of Secondary Ed, follows the protocol, fills out the paperwork for David. When this happens, he asks the director how the formal process works for the school system and legal or formal appeal process works for the school system and the legal system. He's going to inform the director. He's going to meet with the principal, David, and his parents. First, before officially filing the paperwork, Mr. Inman meets with the principal, meets with him and lets him know of the situation if he hasn't done so already. Asks the principal to be in the meeting with David and his parents. Mr. Inman meets with David, his parents, and the principal to inform them that he is required by district to follow the paperwork of expulsion, and Mr. Inman will inform David's parents of the information for the director on how to file an official appeal. He also says that he will be a part of the investigation and will help them get the situation resolved with the school and legally. The official appeal will clear David of any wrongdoing on the school record, and it will continue that way. Mr. Inman turns the expulsion paperwork to the Director of Secondary Education. After meeting with David and his parents, Mr. Inman meets with the district personnel to help the process of David's appeal. And Mr. Inman is going to meet with the school police officer to find out how he can help with the appeal. Alternative option number 2 is Mr. Inman will complies with the Director of Secondary Education, follows the protocol, and files the expulsion paperwork, meets with David and his parents, informs them of the school and district policy and why he had to file the paperwork. He does not provide David or his parents with the process of a formal appeal. He is then reprimanded because by law he has to provide the parents with due process information. Mr. Inman does not do anything to help David file the appeal or right the situation. So he has a decision to be made over, and these are kind of the pros and cons and the desired outcome. If he does no action, the pros are none. Cons is that David becomes a felon and Mr. Inman is reprimanded. The desired outcome is none. No one goes unpunished. Mr. Inman feels he protected David from the school punishment. The extreme outcome, there's no pros that come along with this. David is a felon. Mr. Inman is reprimanded. And again, no one goes unpunished. Mr. Inman's professional career is at stake. David's future is at jeopardy, and James is also at jeopardy. Alternative option number 1, the pros are that Mr. Inman shows he follows protocol and competency to do what is right, and David is allowed due process. Potentially, the con is that potentially David might not get off legally. The desired outcome is that David is acquitted of all charges. Mr. Inman shows his ability to follow protocols and helps by doing what is right for David. Mr. Inman reaches out to David for guidance, or reaches out to James to continue to try and guide him and keep him turning that corner. The second alternative option is that Mr. Inman, the pros show that Mr. Inman follows protocol. Cons is that David and his parents are not informed of their due rights. Mr. Inman is reprimanded for not providing this information, and the desired outcome is that Mr. Inman does what is quickest and easiest for himself, but does not do his duty to help David, and does not try to maintain the relationship with James. The best option, in my opinion, is alternative option number 1, where he's going to fill out the paperwork, follow district policy, and then continue to help David get through the appeal process for both getting it off the school record and off legally. This option allows Mr. Inman to show that he's doing what's right for David by allowing him due process to be acquitted of all charges, both like we said, in the school and legally. Mr. Inman is not reprimanded by the school or the district, and David should be acquitted of school disciplinary action while only being out of school for a few days during this process. James spends his time at the alternative education program and is faced with the repercussions from the legal system.